Hey team, welcome back to another incredible episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Miss Alexis Taylor, and she is the Chief Global Policy Officer for IFPA. And I'm going to let her tell you all about what that acronym stands for here in a minute, because this is a very special interview, a very cool interview, because you got somebody who's got an amazing background in policy and knows a lot about what's going on the global trade space today. So stay tuned. But Alexis, you get the same opening question everybody does right off the top. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here, Mark. And I think that's a great question. And actually, I think leadership in and of itself needs to be intentional, right? And so thinking about intentional leadership, I think they go hand in glove. For me, it's about a deliberateness. So I think being deliberate in setting priorities, in communicating, whether you're communicating those priorities, but also being deliberate in holding teams accountable to the organization on those goals and those priorities. It's almost kind of like three C's around intentionality. So there's
Mm-hmm.
clarity of direction,
Yeah.
consistency, I think, of leaders' actions, and then communication. And that's like purposeful and thoughtful communication. And what that really boils down to me is not just saying the what,
Mm-hmm.
the why behind the what. Organizations, your teams, they want to execute, but ultimately, when you just say, we're going this direction, we're going north, and not the because of X, Y, and Z. It's hard to build that buy-in,
Yeah.
right? And so you, by sometimes just sheer force of will of as a leader, you can maybe push an organization or a team a certain direction. But when you get that buy-in and people understand the why we're heading a certain direction, even if they don't always align, even if they don't always agree with that direction, understanding the why really helps them at least get to, okay, that's the direction we're heading.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing about intentionality in leadership is, and it's something that has been really important for me in my career, is really surrounding yourself with people who don't think like you, with people who
Mm-hmm.
have different experiences and points of view. I think nothing is more dangerous as a leader than having everybody around who is just going to either agree and say, yes, you want to do that? Great, we'll go execute, or have that same point of view, that same lived experience. Because ultimately, I don't know the answer to every question. So I need people
Mm-hmm.
around me to bring up different ideas, to challenge my assumptions, to help me form an opinion or a direction or the ultimate decision. And what I also have found is when you give that space to teams and you ask for that open dialogue, again, ultimately what the direction is, whether it's exactly what they thought the right answer was or the decision was, they had the opportunity to help inform it, and that builds that buy-in. And so I think all of that really forms kind of that, what it means to me to be an intentional leader is it is about being deliberate in a variety of ways with your teams when you're really trying to make decisions and move an organization or team forward.
This may be one of the most complete answers that we've ever had in 225 interviews, Alexis. I love it. You obviously came prepared and I dig it. And yes, I mean, intentionality does require that you be deliberate. What I love is that you broke down how this clarity, consistency, and communication. And I think, as a leader, one of the uncomfortable things is that you're going to have to set a direction that maybe not everybody around you agrees with. And what's unique in the world that we live in today versus the one that you and I grew up in. I mean, I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, we could have lunch with people who didn't believe the same things and get along okay.
Yeah.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like that's very hard to do these days. It's like if you don't agree with my way, then it's sort of my way. It's either my way or the highway, and you got to get on board, or I don't agree with you, and therefore I can't talk to you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. As have built teams in my career, I'm from the Midwest. I grew up on a farm. One of my first chiefs of staff I ever had and hired, she was from Philadelphia. And she found a love of agriculture and wanted to work in agriculture. But it was like so refreshing because as we have grown up in agriculture and farming, have spent our careers in it, but our consumers, the people we're selling products to ultimately, most of them don't have a background in agriculture anymore. They live in urban centers, they live in suburbia, right?
Yeah.
And so having that perspective from someone who grew up, had that different background, I found so impactful because ultimately that's part of who we were trying to communicate to, not just the kind of ecosystem or echo chamber that can be agriculture, but our customers and the people who are ultimately getting our product at the end of the day, that were able, with their decisions, they kind of could form a lot of policy that were impacting the how, farmers were and ranchers were having to produce food. And so being able to think about that aspect, I thought is really important. So I think, to your point, bringing in those different backgrounds, people who have a different worldview, is really important for organizations as you're trying to move forward.
Yeah, it's super healthy. And I mean, every time that you have, this is just, if you just look at countries or geographies, when you have an influx of immigration, as an example, on the lagging 20 years, you always have innovation. Right, because you have your first generation that comes into the country, and then you have the sons and the daughters of that generation that tend to build, and so that mom or dad will immigrate to America, as an example, and then hopefully we do so legally. I'm not going down that rabbit hole today, but we get into the United States, and that first generation establishes some baseline. Usually, right? They come, they find work. And then it's the next generation that often excels in entrepreneurship, builds businesses. If you look at most of the big, what we call like the popular businesses today, be it Tesla, right, or Google, or any of these things, these are all, for the most part, started by second generation, first generation, second generation immigrants, to America. And so they bring a different perspective. My wife and I were just talking about this the other day so she grew up in Italy. She's American, but grew up in Italy, right? And her mom lives with us here in North Carolina, but is born in Italian. Like, they have a different appreciation here for living in America, being in America, because of their background. Even being Italian, and Italian is great. Italy's a great place. We love the food. We're going to talk more about food here in a minute, but it's like when we have those different ideas, it gives us a different angle, a different appreciation, and it strengthens our thinking when we look at it from multiple different perspectives. And this is what happens inside my house, and this is where I want to transition to talking about IFPA more. But just within our little household here, right? You've got a Midwestern boy, born and raised, farm kid from Minnesota, corn, meat and potatoes. Okay, meat and potato, a lot of hot dish. Okay, maybe a Minnesota, that's casserole to the rest of you. Okay. Yeah, and now I'm eating almost fully Mediterranean these days, because I live with two women who like to have fresh fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables. My mother-in-law, her joy in life, other than the Lord, is to go to the grocery store, to go to Whole Foods, or to go to Wegmans and pick out what she wants to eat for that day. Right? Where historically, I'm like, what do we got in the freezer? So very different ideas about what good food is, and how we should raise it and how we shouldn't raise it. And so we have some very strong opinions and ideas about what that means and what good health looks like. So I kind of left you guys hanging on this a little bit. IFPA, talk to us a little bit about it, Alexis, and your role there.
Yeah, so IFPA is the International Fresh Produce Association, and we represent the full supply chain for fresh produce and floral in sectors globally. So we've got members who operate in over 90 countries around the world, and it's everything from seed to our grower shippers, wholesalers, retailers, distributors, all the way to the end consumer for the full fresh fruit and vegetable and floral industry. And we, for me, I am, as you mentioned, our chief global policy officer. So what I do is really set the strategic direction on our advocacy and policy work globally. And we do that in a variety of places around the world, really focused on the places that are setting standards that are impacting the fresh produce and floral industry. And we think about advocacy almost like a coin, and there's two sides to the coin. One is we want to drive demand, we want to increase consumption, fresh fruit and vegetable and florals. And the other side is we want to knock down the barriers that are impacting our industry's ability to do that. So stopping new barriers or policies that could be challenging, changing existing policies that really impact their ability to, again, expand consumption. And part of that is because we don't eat enough fresh fruit and vegetables globally, certainly in the United States. One of our focus regions where we do this advocacy and policy work is in the United States. It's really North America as a region, but certainly a big focus in the United States, because the standards we set, the direction we go, doesn't just stay within the United States borders. It impacts a lot of the world because we are a large consumer of
Hmm.
everything, right? Whether it be the latest technology on iPhones to wanting to have year-round availability of avocados, for example, or bananas, which we do not grow in the United States. So, we are a large consumer, so we can drive how other parts of the world are have to actually farm to meet what our expectations are from a
Hmm.
regulatory or policy environment, or from a consumer expectation point of view. IFPA also, while I run the policy and advocacy work, we do a lot of other things.
Hmm.
We have over 3,000 members globally, so we are bringing the industry together in a variety of ways to provide education around new challenges, future challenges, emerging issues. It could be something around AI and how is our industry leveraging or not leveraging AI, and what are some ways businesses should be thinking about using AI to maximize their efficiency. We obviously do a lot around food safety. Everyone in the fresh produce industry would tell you food safety is our number one job because we are often eating these products raw. And so the ability to protect human health is first and foremost, I think, in minds of all of our members, the entire industry, as they are producing the healthiest food and the most sustainable food, honestly, in the world. So we do a variety of different things, but I am responsible just for our policy, what our priorities are, and ultimately the outcomes that are driving our industry forward.
Wow. Okay. So we don't have enough time to go through all the things I would love to go through with you today, but I do want to touch on this. Do you remember when we were kids and like certain times of the year, you just didn't have certain things, right? Like, I
Absolutely.
don't,
Well, I never saw an avocado. I grew up
yeah,
in a rural community in Iowa. And, I grew up pre NAFTA, the North
yeah.
America Free Trade Agreement, which liberalized trade across North America. And today, I challenge you to go into a rural grocery store or restaurant and not find avocados on the grocery shelves, or a menu item, a salad, a sandwich that does not have avocado on it.
Hmm. Yep. Percent. That's just like one. Maybe you don't like avocados. I mean, grapes, right? When I was my mom, get this, my mom would go when the grapes were in the store. She would buy a bunch. She'd get them like at some like when they're about to expire, get them on discount, and she would can them. I grew up on canned grapes.
Wow, that I've never heard of.
We also had canned meat. Disgusting, disgusting. But it was like, I mean, we were grew up in like, I mean, they were my folks were. I had older parents as a kid. I mean, they were 40 when I was born, but they grew up right out of the Depression, right? So they grew up with that mentality of preserve, save everything, like don't throw anything away, that kind of thing. And so anyway, but that like I was trying to explain to my kids recently, and we've got half a dozen kids from 10 up to 24 now, but they don't remember a time when you couldn't just get whatever you want. Like we would go once a year, the Amish Mennonites in our area would drive to Georgia and they would get a bunch of peaches and they would bring those peaches. And then we would buy two big boxes of peaches and you would have fresh peaches for like a week and the rest of them, my mom would can. And then we had canned peaches the rest of the year. Like that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that today is something consumers expect. They
Exactly.
expect year-round fresh produce in the produce aisles of their grocery stores. And, at certain times of the year, they can go to a farmer's market and buy, support a local farmer and buy whatever berries or leafy greens. But the rest of the year, in certain parts of the country, that's just never going to be an option. And so,
Mhm.
how, making sure that we have supply chains and systems in place that facilitate that movement of that product, because as soon as you pick that product, whether they're flowers that are cut, an apple that is picked, it starts to deteriorate, right? And
Mhm.
so you're under a time pressure as from the moment it's harvested to the moment it gets to that consumer. And so, really having regulatory systems, sanitary and phytosanitary systems that are based in science that facilitate that movement is really important, because we in the fresh produce industry don't have the luxury of having a container stuck at port for 2 weeks. If it's a container of cherries, those cherries are no longer viable.
Hmm. Yeah, I met a guy playing cornhole in a cornhole league one time when I lived in La Crosse, Wisconsin. His job working for Quick Trip is he's the banana ripener.
Ah,
So like it just that I never thought of that as being a job, but that is his. I mean, think if you go, how many Quick Trip stores are there across Wisconsin, Minnesota, Quick Star in Iowa,
yeah.
right? All these places, and they all have bananas. And there's one guy in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in charge of making sure that you have, but ripe bananas, because they're not picking them right, down in Costa Rica or wherever they harvest these things from. So okay, fascinating stuff. Let's talk about some of the things you guys are working on over there. If we get a little bit of time at the end, I want to talk about maybe some more of your career, which, by the way, you guys, you do need to know this about Alexis. Like, I mean, this is not somebody who's just lived policy like randomly. Like, she comes from a farm in Iowa. She went to Iowa State. She's an Army veteran, spent some time deployed in Iraq. So if the word that comes through for me is like grit. Like, here's a girl that's got some grit. She's seen some things. She's been through some stuff. Been Secretary of Agriculture for an entire state up in Oregon. Like, have you slept in the last 20 years? What the heck?
Slept a little. Yeah, yeah.
Like, I've done a lot of things, but I feel like really incompetent compared to this resume that I'm looking at. So great job. You've done a lot. Thank you for the work that you've done, and thank you for your service. Let's talk through just your policy agenda at IFPA. You guys released this in at the end of March. So we got workforce sustainability, nutrition, health, producer profitability, trade. I'm sure that's a hot topic right now. Supply chain resilience. We talked a little bit about food safety modernization. Let's just go from the top and see how far we get. So, workforce stability. Does that? I mean,
Well,
what do
actually,
we?
I would talk about it this way, because I think
Yeah.
historically we have, as a sector, really thought about these issues as a silo, right? So we've got workforce and we've got nutrition and we've got trade, but really what they are is like interconnected into a single system.
Okay.
And you need all of them to function as we think about producer viability, producer profitability, and having that access ultimately to having wholesome nutritious food on the grocery store shelves in your community, wherever that is. So we want to improve health outcomes, right? As Americans, like that's a whole movement in the United States right now, is being healthier. But that requires increased consumption of fruits and vegetables. Increased consumption requires a stable and reliable year-round supply. A stable and reliable year-round supply depends on viable growers.
Hmm.
Viable growers depend on a reliable workforce. Grower viability depends on a policy and economic environment that supports that, right? And so it is,
It's all
while we have these, I'm sorry, it's all interconnected, because if one of those, if say you just pull workforce and we don't have a workforce there, it doesn't, like the rest of it, right? You could have the right policy environment to incentivize, say, increased consumption of fruits and vegetables. But if you don't have a workforce to actually get those crops, and this is still very much a manual labor industry, those crops out of the field, it doesn't matter what incentives you have for Americans, say, to eat more fruits and vegetables, like, right? So you pull one piece of that kind of that system out, and none of it really works. And that's what we have been really, I think, seeing and struggling with as an industry. Now we are trying to automate and mechanize wherever we can, but there are certain aspects, I think, of our industry in particular, as opposed to maybe other parts of agriculture, that that's just not going to be possible, or with today's technology isn't going to be possible. So, when I look at our policy agenda, and yes, we have these discrete topics, but ultimately it is about moving the needle forward on all of these topics, because at the end of the day, we want more Americans eating fruits and vegetables, and only 90% of Americans do not. So only 10% of Americans meet the minimum recommendations, which we would say are 5 a day, 400 grams of fruits and veggies. Only 10% meet that minimum recommendation. So we need, if we want better health outcomes, the easiest, simplest thing we can do is eat better and eat more nutritious, wholesome foods, which are fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. Could could we meet the demand if tomorrow it's like it became a massive TikTok trend? You remember like the milk challenge that used to go through? Like, so if there's a green pepper challenge, or something like that, where all of a sudden like it becomes the trendy thing, and everybody's like, hey, we need to work 500 gram challenge, and I'm going to get 500 grams of fresh fruits and vegetables. Can we meet it? Can we meet the demand?
So I think, meeting that demand will require multiple things. And one is, again, what we've seen in our industry and agriculture broadly is right declining. We're seeing declining farmland, more farmland going into development, which is very problematic. That land never comes back once it's developed. We're seeing aging farmers. We're seeing, a consolidation across agriculture. Certainly, we see that in the produce industry as well. And so I think there's a lot that has to happen. I think trade is another important part of it because to our conversation earlier was that they around having year-round access, having say blueberries in January. Consumers want that. We cannot grow blueberries in January in the United States, maybe in small parts of California, but really predominantly nowhere in the United States. So having trade and systems that function in a predictable science-based way is really important to be able to meeting that access.
Yeah.
And I would challenge that, farmers, our growers, the agricultural industry, nobody raises or rises to a challenge quite like them. So
Yeah.
I would love to have that challenge and I would love to have that problem that so many Americans were eating the minimum fruits and vegetable recommendations that it was a true question if we could supply it.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see more of that, just because I'd look at the people who do have a good like consistent uptake of that stuff into their nutrition regimen, let's call it, into what they eat every
Mhm.
day, and the results are really incredible.
Yeah.
Physical health, is just better, and there's a trickle down effect there, by the way, that impacts our healthcare system and everything else, and just having people around that are healthier and happier, and then there's some positive benefits to that, but
Well,
also.
sorry. No, I think building on that point, Mark, we've really focused on life expectancy for a long time, but we haven't focused on health expectancy.
Mhm.
If you
Yeah.
look 100 years ago, globally, expectancy was about 35 years old.
Hmm.
Today, globally, it's 73 years old. So we have, because of modern medicine and technologies, but we haven't necessarily always invested or put the same attention on our health span than
Right.
our lifespan. And so it's the basics. It's exercise, it's getting good sleep. And yes, it's eating a healthy diet, i.e. more fruits and vegetables, right? So there
Mhm.
are some like of those fundamentals that I think we need to get back to. So while we live longer, we actually have a better quality of life and better health long term.
Yeah. I think we've just arrived at that point in humanity now where that's the next unlock,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
for most of human civilization, it has been survival. And so we're very much programmed as a species for survival. Our industry, by the way, is very much programmed for survival. And this is the unlock both economically and from a human health perspective, I believe. And this is what I think is in many cases kind of the new North Star for agriculture and agribusiness is helping humanity unlock that and operating from a place of abundance rather than a place of scarcity.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
that's
think in the in the food, I think it's about access because most people would say we produce enough food, right? We have issues with food waste and food loss, a distribution of where that food is. There's wealth distribution around the globe on who can or cannot access or afford certain food. But we have these same challenges in the United States. When you look at a program, it's called the Women and Infant Children Program, WIC, which helps low income, pregnant women, mothers, children access certain healthy food staples. Fruits and vegetables is a component of that. 50% of kids born today are eligible for WIC. 50%.
wow.
There's an access to these healthy foods that I think we really need to tackle from a policy perspective because it's not that we're not growing enough food necessarily globally. It's that we still have hundreds of millions of people around the world who are facing moderate or severe food insecurity.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so you bring up a really good point. It gives me an opportunity to talk about my favorite charity in America, my favorite nonprofit, which is it's called Hatch for Hunger. And granted, it's protein focused and not fruit and vegetable focused, but very easily, could be related. And so one of our things that Christine and I like to do, so we're a tithing company. So we're 10% off of gross goes to some, whether it's the church, or we like to support Cora, which is our local food pantry here in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. We get invited to their dinners because of the amount of money that we donate. I'm not here to tout how much we're donating. That's not the point. We get to be at the table to hear about some of these food insecurity conversations. And so I feel exactly what you're saying. What Danny and the Hatch for Hunger team are doing, they're out of Indianapolis, is they're working with producers, they're working with the egg layers, they're working with the Tysons, the protein companies of the world, to get protein into these food insecure areas. And so one of the things that we do on occasion when we can is we sponsor a cooler. Okay. So here's an interesting thing. There's 60,000 food pantries in America. Only 20,000 have refrigeration. So so the only thing you can put in a food pantry without refrigeration is a shelf stable item. There's no opportunity to have fruits and vegetables or chicken, right? Which, chicken permeates almost every culture, every religion, every culture. Almost everybody eats that. Not everybody eats pork, not everybody eats beef, dairy, etc. But almost everybody eats chicken. And so that's one way that we can get that in there. So that's what they work on, is chicken and eggs. Chicken and eggs. They're buying hundreds of millions of dozens of eggs to get those into the places where people, and a lot of these folks that are on WIC maybe couldn't, they can't. And so I'm going to encourage everybody just to go look up Hatch for Hunger. And I think for like $5,000, your company can buy a cooler. Every company that can afford $5,000 should buy one. Like Danny will put your label on it and they'll put it into a food pantry somewhere in America that needs one. We could, if we came together as an industry, you can't tell me that we couldn't raise 5,000 times 40,000 coolers and get every food pantry in America a cooler.
Yeah. And increase access in those communities to
So
diverse,
big. That's just a
healthy
start.
food
Yeah.
options. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For
Yep.
sure. I would say, I think, and this is not a dig at the protein comment, but we do eat enough protein
Yeah.
in the United States, right? Like generally, when you look at kind of the big picture numbers, about 97% of Americans get enough protein. And listen, I'm very focused on protein. I track it. I want to make sure I'm eating enough protein. But 95% of Americans do not get enough fiber. Obviously, fruits and veggies are a great source of fiber. And so I do think, in our policy environment, we're really focused in DC around protein, which is fine. But really, one of the largest challenges that I think we need to tackle is that fiber component and, not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And so it is something, certainly, and that's not a knock on, like I said, protein. We all need to be eating protein, but when you look at just the numbers, like that's not the gap that we should be trying to solve for today.
Yeah, well, it goes hand in hand, right? If we have the infrastructure in place to get one there, then we can easily put the other one right on top of it, or right behind it. And so that's right. I get passionate about solving that. Like to me, that's in a world that's so big and there's so many things going on. And like for the average person out here that's just watching the news or reading the headlines or watching their X feed or whatever, it's like, it's very ambiguous. And it's like, what can I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm not there. I'm not in the Beltway. I don't understand all the policy. Like I care about this stuff. I guess I got to go do a job today, right? I have a career. I have kids. I'm busy. There's a lot of stuff. Like, I'd love to give people something that they can just focus on, right? And so, at the individual level, I could just say like, hey, go like feed your family more fruits and vegetables and protein for that matter, but like get some. Is there are there practical ways though? Do you guys get involved with anything where it's like, hey, like here's cool recipes or a free, like to make it practical for people?
Yeah, we do. So we have a partner organization to IFPA called the Foundation for Fresh Produce.
Hmm.
And they are really consumer focused. So how do we get information? Because we moved through this time also, when we were growing up, of convenience and really moving to other convenient forms. A lot of women were starting to work, right? They were raising families. They were suddenly juggling different things than, say, my grandma was having to juggle, even though she had 12 kids, she was still baking bread fresh for the family every week, right? They were only eating her homemade bread. Like life evolved differently. And so I think, we've moved away from understanding just how to cook, how to use some of these products. And so we have a website, it's with the foundation, it's called fruitandveggies.org. And
Okay.
there are a whole host of like hundreds, thousands maybe of recipes to say, okay, I have an avocado and I want to use it for breakfast, or I want to do something with it for dinner besides maybe guacamole. Like, how can I use this? And so you can really look up products in different types of recipes at different, points of the day on how you can kind of prepare fruits and vegetables. So yeah, thanks for asking. I think that's a great resource that we have to try and share. There are a lot of different ways that you can use these products at whatever point of the day, whether you're eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or for a snack.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's what I was curious is like, so what are we doing to make it practical and easier for people? Because I think the harsh reality is a lot of people, and I'm not even going to say young people, just a lot of people in general don't know how to cook some of these things, prepare some of these things. What would you eat? And I bring some of our team together who are largely Midwestern based, and I bring them down to our house, and we make them the good Mediterranean diet that we live on here now at our house, because my wife is Italian and her mom's from Italy, and so forth. Like, they have a different standard for eating. And so it's a lot of fresh vegetables, a lot of fresh fruits, and a lot of like cheeses and protein and everything as well. But it's like, it's a departure for many people to go from like the meat and potatoes diet that you and I probably grew up on to something that's a little bit more fresh.
Yeah. Well, potatoes are fresh produce, so I also want to
True.
acknowledge that.
I'm not
But
dogging it, but it's like,
yeah.
I mean, that's like, we know the potato root, right? And also, I mean, so also know this, I grew up in that. So for the last 18 years, I've had a daughter who's type 1 diabetic.
Mhm.
And so, I also notice every day has been a little bit of a petri dish around here. Like, we notice when I give her certain foods, what happens to blood sugar.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this is personal, and I'm not necessarily recommending this to anybody as saying like, this is my health advice, but I notice like, so we eat plenty of potatoes. Don't get me wrong. Like, we eat a lot, but it also like, it's always paired with a protein, and almost always paired with a salad or some sort of fresh fruit and vegetable. Because when you just do the potato or the potato chip or the French fry, you get a massive spike in blood sugar, and it's very fast, and it's very like over time, like one time, no big deal. But when you're doing it every day, right, this is contributing to a lot of other, type 2 diabetes and things like that. So we have to be aware of like what certain things do. And so food pairing to me is just really important, because when you pair that with a protein, by the way, I'm not talking about a cheeseburger from McDonald's. I'm talking about like actual, like good quality protein. They can come after me. I don't care. Like, it's, you gotta have a good quality protein paired with that carb, and it helps to balance it all out.
Sure.
Anyway.
To one of your earlier points when you were talking about just, consumers and maybe not as tied to cooking and how to use some of these products, one of the big trends we do see in the fresh produce industry is a move towards convenience. Americans really want convenience.
Yeah.
So, and we're all seeing it in our grocery stores, right? We're seeing the pre-bagged salads where the dressing's in there, all the toppings, just open it up and go. It's all pre-chopped. We're seeing, pre-chopped vegetables or fruit, or maybe like onions and peppers, that so you can just take it home, dump it, and do a stir fry. And so that is really something I think that consumers are moving towards, and is an interesting way as we think about increasing consumption, but also some of that food waste concerns I think that we have as just kind of globally, but certainly as an industry. I live alone. And so sometimes when I buy, say, a loaf of bread, like, I'm throwing out half of that loaf before I can get to eating all of it, right? Like, I'm not eating that much bread. And so like, just I think there are new ways to serve consumers who are looking for convenience still, but are also looking for healthy, convenient options.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. If you could affordably offer like a food preparation service that allows us to just like throw it in a pan or heat it up or whatever, when it comes supper time. Cause like we both work from home, we run this business together, and we go hard right up until the wire more days than we don't. We're very fortunate. We have extra people, young adult children that are here several days a week. And, my mother-in-law is 78, being in the house. So we have help, but most Americans do not. And so, or if you're, living alone, such a like, wow, like, I mean, just to have something that makes it convenient, but I can still eat healthy.
Mhm.
I think there's huge upside to that. I want to offer, we're going to run up on time here. So I want to offer this like prophecy, if I will, for the future, because I think the next 10 years are going to be really interesting in America for a lot of different reasons. Okay. Maybe we can talk about AI with this answer too, just a little bit, because I know you like it. But I'm I'm gonna offer this prediction, right, and just give you a chance to respond to it, and like, how would we make this true if it's a good idea? So I think the next 10 years, 15 years are going to be really, really interesting in America. I'm not going to say bad. I'm not going to say good. I think they're going to be interesting because I think we're going to have a very different world in a decade and a half than the one that we live in today, largely due to the advent of, our next industrial revolution, which is going to be largely tech based. So a little business like mine, we now do the work that we did with 6 people with three and a half, right? But we're doing more and we're doing it more profitably. That's good, right? It's good for our business. It makes us more sustainable. It's going to help us to create more jobs. Okay. So I think that's a good thing. But I'm personally getting the work done of probably 5 people. Some days I do a month's worth of things in a day because Claude and ChatGPT allow me to do, massive scale. When I'm locked in and focused, it's pretty incredible. So let's just assume a lot of white collar work is going to get replaced. UAE, as an example, take a government example. UAE just committed to 50% of their government stuff is all going to be AI agent driven within, I don't know, 5 years. Like that's their timeline. Okay. Now, granted, smaller country, when you're run by a monarch, you can do certain things that we can't get through Congress, but you can replace a lot of government work. You can replace a lot of like I'm just going to say white collar stuff. I don't think we're going to replace plumbers or farming or a lot of the stuff. But I just had Tim Bucher with Agtonomy, and they're doing some stuff out in California where, you're going to have robotics driven by AI going down the rows, working in some of the fresh fruits and vegetables and the nut farming space. That's going to be very, very AI driven because they struggle to get the first thing that we were talking about, which is labor, in that part of the world. So I think the world is going to look very different. I think people will have the option. I was going to say this. I think people will have the option to have more time to do things. And sort of like in COVID, when we drove up, like even though it was miserable and terrifying and very weird for everybody, weird being a nice way of putting it without offending anybody, but it was weird for all of us. People spent more time at home. They did more home projects. They learned to cook things. The TikTok trends went crazy and we did them all. What happens in a world where for a whole decade, all of a sudden people have more freedom, more autonomy? We figure out how to fund it. You figure out how to get things paid for. I'm sure, there's going to be some really interesting stuff there. But now you have like an entire society that just has more time to cook more fresh fruits and vegetables, to learn how to do some of these things again. Maybe some of it will be out of necessity and maybe some of it will be out of interest. But I think that's going to be a lot of the next decade, is people spending actually more time with their families, more time at home. That's going to become more important. They're going to have more freedom and flexibility to do that, whether it is given to them or whether it is something that they opt into because, like me, they just found a way to get more done or get their job done faster and more efficiently and provide more value to their employer. So I think that's uh, kind of a wide end of the funnel. But let's just say I think that's going to drive up the demand for fresh fruits and vegetables and everything else for that matter. But I do believe it will drive up the demand. So what if we were to triple the demand, quadruple X the demand? For fresh fruits and vegetables. Like, what are the technologies that we need? What's the policy that we need? What's the leadership, the intentional leadership we need to make that become a reality?
Wow, that is a big forward-looking question. And I think, there are, what's really interesting to me is for a long time, like we all want the newest technologies, like on our phones, on our computers, and our cars, but we don't necessarily apply that to our food, right? There can be a sentiment in consumers sometimes. It's like, well, I want my food raised the way my grandma did it. And my grandma was getting potatoes with a shovel in her, large garden in Iowa, right? And then they'd be down in the root cellar for the rest of the season. And so I do think there are a lot of new innovations coming down the pipe and that we will need to really be able to meet this demand.
Hmm.
AI is certainly one of them that is going to help make agriculture more efficient. There's a huge amount of data just in agriculture, and helping individual businesses and farmers analyze that data is going to be, I think, really a key thing that AI can be doing
Yeah.
today for those businesses. For our organization, we have an initiative called Supply Chain of the Future. And it's really about democratizing the data that's in there in the supply chain. Because again, right, as soon as that crop is harvested, you're on the clock, right, under the gun to get to it to the end consumer, wherever
Yeah.
that is, whether it's through food service or retail or what have you. And so really leveraging all that data, democratizing it so we can understand how much time is being spent at each step of the supply chain, and then providing incentives for the people who are shrinking that supply chain time window in those steps. So the people who are moving product the most efficient, delivering the best consistent quality, that we're incentivizing them. So there's unique, I think, technologies already being deployed in the fresh produce industry today to help that. But I also think, technologies like gene editing, which I think we're going to see more and more, coming down the pipe in the fresh produce industry, as there are other challenges that agriculture is trying to grapple with as well. So climate variability. So how are we raising some of these products that are highly climate sensitive, highly environmental sensitive, in a way that addresses some of those challenges, whether it's increased pest pressure, changing weather patterns, etc. And so I think there's a lot of new technology that is needed, is being deployed today, but is going to continue need to come to really help some of the challenges we have. And labor, I think, is a great example. Kind of where we started is we're still very much a industry that has a lot of hands and touch points on our supply chain. And how can we bring in robotics? And there's a lot of research and investment, a lot of this new technology is being deployed, but then AI is, I think, the next level on top of that. When I
Hmm.
was in Oregon, it's a big produce state, so they grew a couple big of the sectors are like potatoes, onions, but also
Yeah.
kind of cherries. And each of
Yeah.
those sectors were deploying at the time optical ciders. And so every single piece of fruit or vegetable was getting, a couple hundred pictures taken of it. And it helped them to sort by then size, sort by color, helped on the grade, right? And that was less people down the line that they needed to do those activities. Now, what those industries would tell you is they didn't hire less people. They had to shift those people to different parts of the production because they still needed people, and they were understaffed to begin with. Because labor is still, I think, that foundational piece. Like, we can have all of these policies and outcomes, but if we don't have the people to do the work, whether it's the farmers or employees that they need to be able to deliver that food. But I think, mechanization, automation, AI is all going to help advance and make it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think it's going to be so fascinating, right?
Hmm.
I saw some video the other day about some humanoid robot that beat one of the best people in the world at ping pong. Okay. But that silly as it may seem, like that's a pretty good test.
Yeah.
They can win at ping pong. I bet they can sort potatoes. Just saying,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and probably do it faster, better, and cheaper long term than a human. So,
Yeah. Interesting, when you mentioned COVID, one of the things we did see also during COVID is this huge increase in for the floral industry,
mm,
increased sales because people were suddenly in their homes more. And, we know fresh flowers bring people a lot of joy, really bring people a lot of like
yeah,
mental happiness. There's actually a lot of research that shows this. But so suddenly people were in their homes more, right? And they suddenly hated their kitchen and wanted to renovate it. But they also were like, they really wanted those fresh cut flowers in their home. And what we have seen is, it maybe dropped a little, but really a stabilization from pre-COVID levels. So like we saw this big increase and then stabilize. And so people continue to see that kind of joy that they're bringing into their home. We also saw big upticks of at-home gardening. People who had never gardened before suddenly had some time, and they're like, I'm going to try and grow some of my own, you know,
mhm,
vegetables this summer. And so I think it is an interesting question to your kind of the starting point is like, we're going to see different things probably as AI comes in, as we're able to maximize it, and we as an industry, but certainly as an association, are very forward leaning on AI and how we can take these tools and make us more efficient, better at our jobs, push, have that do the things that we're spending a lot of time, but maybe not bringing a lot of value, and then really focusing on the things that we still need humans to do, and we're still going to need humans to do some of these things.
100%. 100%. I think it's going to be an interesting mix. It's going to be an interesting walk. I know we're a little bit over time. Do you have time for one more quick question?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
policy focused. Okay. So I think obviously there's a lot of, I mean, from whether it's tariff stuff that we're talking about, trade in general, we're obviously moving from a globalization approach to Americanization, or more nationalist approach, right? So we're going to be, American, everybody's kind of knuckling down to defend themselves, so to speak, in this new world that we're walking into right now. So what does that mean for us? Like so obviously we can't grow year round blueberries and avocados and strawberries and all the stuff that we like to get. So we're going to need to have trade, at least in the Western hemisphere, to be able to work with South America and Latin America and Canada and everything. So what does that mean from that perspective, from a policy standpoint? Like, what do we need to be aware of? What do we need to be talking to our legislators about, influencing? What should we be watching for?
Yeah, I think one of the, maybe taking a couple steps back before I talk
Mhm.
about the fresh produce and floral industry, but as one of the things that we've really seen is for kind of the past post World War II world, when the in kind of globalized environment, the more recent philosophy around trade really evolved out of. The U.S. was really stepped up and was one of the largest agricultural suppliers in the world. For a lot of
Mhm.
it, was the largest agricultural exporter in the world, right? And today, agriculture has developed, continued to develop in other parts of the world. And when you look at some of our largest exports, it's corn, soy, beef. Other countries have advanced their own agricultural sectors, right? Brazil, for example, and they are competing head to head in a lot of what we were the leader in exports on, and
Mhm.
they started to take away market share, partly because, right, there could be a price differential. And right now, I think there are some geopolitical dynamics that if people can diversify from the United States, because we are not seen as a consistent, reliable trading partner, they are looking to do so. That genie's not going to go kind of back. Brazil isn't, they're only going to continue to increase their agricultural output and compete more head to head in a lot of other markets around the world. So I think just at the macro, it's when we're still growing, 90 million acres of corn, are there different ways to be utilizing corn or soy in the United States, right? How do we diversify those farmers' income streams? What are the policies we need around renewable fuels, for example, to really help support those producers, those sectors, because they're still a really important part of our economy. And when you look, say, 150 years ago, 90% of kind of the population in America lived in rural areas, and today about 10% do. And less than 1% is actually growing our food, right? And so I think we need to think more holistically. Export markets are going to be an important part of that. And it's not that we're never going to be exporting corn or soy or beef again. That's going to continue to be important, but the competition is going to be harder. So what are also some other alternative uses and markets that we can support those growers and those industries on, and maybe achieve some other outcomes and that or priorities that we have in the policy space, whether it's around, American grown fuel, etc. I think, for the, fresh produce and floral industry, one of the things we've really been focused on is advocating to try to get our products exempted from the tariff dynamics of the moment for a variety of reasons. One, we're highly perishable. Two, it runs counter to the administration's goals around making America healthy again. To what we've been talking about this whole time, you can't make America healthy again without fruits and vegetables, and we need
Right.
reliable, consistent supply of them. And for a lot of it, we can't produce ourselves. But then it's also the regulatory systems that could make it really challenging for our producers here in the United States. They need reliable access to labor. One of our big focuses that we consistently focus on is around H2A
Mhm.
immigration, or H2A reform, which is a ag worker visa, making that more efficient, easier to use. There are a lot of challenges with it. Working with the administration on that aspect of immigration, are those H2A workers. some of the overregulation we've seen in the industry over the years and really focusing on what that looks like. And then making sure we have new tools for our farmers. I talked about gene editing, making sure the regulatory systems are there in a way that is practical to allow some of those tools to come to market quickly. Because you can have a great idea, but if you're stuck in a regulatory approval process that takes you 10 years to get through, technology's already advanced well beyond that, right? And those producers ultimately haven't seen the benefit. So I think there's a lot of different things at the macro agricultural level that we're going to need to really grapple with, but then also at the more granular kind of fruits and vegetable level that we are actively working on today.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Really, really good answer on that. I think that those are some of the things that we all need to be thinking about. And if you're having the opportunity to write your congressman or your senator a letter to lobby for, I would just encourage people to get educated on some of those things. This is something I've historically ignored because I'm too busy doing my life. But recently it's become more personal. And this is not a food thing specifically, but they've effectively, the University of Chicago has been doing something called the Eledon trials. And in the Eledon trials, they have this company Eledon, it's a pharmaceutical company, has created an autoimmune suppressant, or basically a drug that helps people who get an organ transplant to have their body not reject the organ without toxicity. So historically, those drugs that allow you to keep the organ, but they also have a lot of negative downstream effects. And supposedly the science is saying this Eledon trial is very, very gentle on the body. And so they are now taking islet cells from donors. Okay. So people who have passed away, they're taking islet cells and transplanting those into the pancreas of people with type 1 diabetes. And I think they're batting 20 for 20 on the first 20 people that they've done. One lady has been completely insulin free now for 2 years. So it's working. So effectively they've cured type 1 diabetes, but islet cells are considered a drug and not an organ transplant. So insurance won't cover it. So here again, so I only cite this as this my personal way that has gotten me to really start looking at the policy around certain things that are just absolutely stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a thing that we can cure. 7% of the global population has got type 1 diabetes. 7% of 8 billion. That's a lot. You've got here's a thing that we can do in America. So let's assume 7 billion out of 350 million, or excuse me, 7% out of 350 million people have type 1. That's a lot of people that we can help in America with a simple policy change that just gets stuck in Congress. And so that's a thing that you can write your congressman about to support the bill that will get islet cell transfer changed from a drug to a donor, thing, so that people's insurance will cover it. There are so many other things that are related to the policies that you just brought up that are going to support, get out of the way so we can make more healthy food for people, that we can import healthy food, that we can export healthy food, right? That we can, create ways for farmers, growers in America to be able to do their business. Let them have raw milk if they want it. I don't care. If that's in the way and that's what you want to sell, fine. So it's funny. You go to downtown Pittsburgh here in North Carolina and you walk around, there are people selling, it looks like a drug deal going down. I kid you not. There are people selling raw milk out of the back of their truck. It says it's labeled properly, says labeled, not for human consumption. It's only there for your dog, but it's just stupid that we have to do things like that we can't make good, healthy food that's been fine for all of humanity for a long time. So with those kinds of things in mind, I just encourage people to be intentional about your efforts, to bring it back to what you opened with, Alexis, that intentionality is deliberate, which means you mean to do it. Right? You're going to do it on purpose, that you would do it with clarity. You know what you want. You do it with consistency, do it regularly, and that you would communicate to the people around you why you're doing it, why it's important. I thought you had a beautiful definition at the front of it, and I greatly appreciate your input today. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Mm-hmm.